What about the offense, though? It's like the opposite of the defense. The defense is young and completely renovated, a bunch of new starters. The offense is essentially the same core they've had for a long time, minus Debo, and they're trying to keep it together. Some guys who were out last year with injury. What do you expect from this offense? They were 4th in terms of yards gained last year, but only 13th in points scored.
They could not score in the red zone last year.
They had a tough time.
Sorry, go ahead, Chase.
No, if you're about to go on a rant, the floor is yours.
It'll be interesting. I think Grant, if you're correct and Ricky is playing like a top, 10 player on this football team, which by the way, he should be. I often like when I'm thinking about Ricky, I'm like, oh, let's not overstate expectations. And then I'm like, wait, he was a first round draft pick. Why do I think that he
ran a
be a top
4.4? He's like a 40-inch vert. He's a hell of an athlete.
And that could add really necessary speed to this team that the 49ers need. If they can start throwing the ball to Kittle more, if Ricky does take a step of improvement, I think that this team could be very, very good. I think they kind of found a key when they started going away from Debo last year, but they just didn't commit to that decision because then he would get upset. And it felt like Kyle was like trying to make sure that he didn't go on Twitter rants or something, or maybe save their friendship. I don't really understand what was going on. But when they didn't force feed Debo the ball at the end of the season last year, not just talking about the last 3 games, but maybe the last like 6 or so games, thinking from that Bears game on, they started targeting George Kittle in the red zone more. And they weren't force feeding Debo. And then at the very end of the season, they got Ricky involved in the same position that Debo was in. And you actually saw their offense improve quite a lot. They were just already out of the playoff race. Now, they were still not maybe the explosive offense we have come to expect because they were missing Christian McCaffrey, and so they didn't have the running element. But I think if they can see, if this Jordan James guy really is an Elijah Mitchell prototype, and then they get, Luke Farrell blocking more, and they actually utilize Kittle more as a pass catcher, and he can be a star in that element. It could be a really explosive offense. Like we've seen the 49ers have an explosive offense. We know they can get down the field. The hump that they have to overcome is, okay, once you're in the 5-yard line, can you actually put the ball in the end zone? They had 2 issues. One, they couldn't score a touchdown to save their life. And then 2, when they weren't scoring touchdowns, then their kicker wasn't making field goals. So they were burning all this clock, walking all the way down the field, and then just not walking away with no points and giving the other team.
They also committed 27 turnovers last year. There was that too.
So
a lot of penalties.
Brock Purdy,
as well.
are you going to take care of the football? Kyle Shanahan, are you going to scheme your offense to actually score in the end zone? And then I know, it's no one comes to talk about kickers, but are you going to have a kicker that's not a head case? I don't care how talented he is in practice. If the 49ers, which to be fair, they should be able to score a touchdown. That's on them. But if you're in a situation where they can't, you need to have a kicker that's reliable. Like when we're talking about 2023, Chase, you were saying what an incredible team. And we go back, like they also had a kicker that was money for years. They had a kicker that they could rely on. So lot of improvements needed in the offense, but I can see a scenario where those improvements do happen and they're back to being an explosive offense.
Yeah. Couple of things that come to mind too with what Ashley said and what we were talking about earlier about somehow the Niners being 8th in yards allowed, but 28th in points allowed. One is what Ashley just said. The Niners offense would drive down the field. They had no problem moving the ball. Once they got inside the red zone, they couldn't score. And then when they did have to trot out the field goal unit, Jake Moody would always miss. And so with the offense controlling the ball a lot, the defense wasn't on the field that much. And so that helped them not give up that many yards. Another thing too, opposing offenses had a lot of short fields. Why? Because this Niners special teams unit was a fucking joke.
That's true.
So you expect the special teams unit to be a little bit better, and that'll help put this defense in a better position to succeed. And so I think this Niners team in its entirety as a whole is going to improve just on the basis of them playing more complementary football. And so I don't know if you guys have anything to respond to that. If not, I'll talk about the offense. But those are some things that came to mind as I'm kind of listening to you guys talk.
No, I want to hear what your expectations are for the offense.
Okay. So I think there's something to be said for the Niners being recharged and refreshed. I thought last year they looked and played like a team that was checked out and mentally and physically fatigued. I think a big reason for that, human nature. They made it to 4 NFC championship games and 2 Super Bowls in 5 years. And so they played a lot of ball deep into the calendar year, which resulted in shorter off seasons. And they were becoming an older team that played a physical brand of ball. And so I just think they were worn out last year. And what Kyle Shanahan said at the NFL owners meetings, he said it and I was like, interesting. He said, I'm as excited and as like refreshed as I am for this year as I've been in a really long time. What did Brock Purdy say last week? We're in the building. We're feeling charged up and ready to go. And I just think that that is a thing with this Niners team. And so I think that's going to help Shanahan have a better year because he coached terribly last year, in my opinion, compared to the expectations that we have of him and what he's done in the past as one of the top offensive coaches in the NFL. So I think he bounces back. If the head coach bounces back, what's that?
He sort of set the tone for their malaise. It was almost his malaise.
Yeah.
And he was not creative last year. I feel like multiple times you would just be like, wow, you have no Debo went out, Christian McCaffrey went out, and you have no idea what to do now. Like your hands are tied.
He couldn't adjust. He had a tough time. Prize Picks will give you $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. Win or lose, you'll get $50 for playing. Use promo code Cohn, COHN, and download the app now.
Yeah.
In the past, he was someone who could adjust. And like I said, with the Elijah Mitchell, it's like, wow, you made a star out of the guy who's on the Dolphins now, Grant. And
Mostert.
Yeah. He used to be able to I'm just agreeing with you, Chase. Like, used to see creativity in Kyle's offense, and it was lacking last year for whatever reason. You didn't see him. He could not adjust, at least in game.
Well, it's also funny how Kyle Juszczyk said last year, oh, everybody thinks there's this dark cloud and weird vibe around our team. He said this in training camp. There was, and it translated to the entire season. Yeah. And the contract drama, I think, caused some of that malaise, the aforementioned malaise that you guys were talking about. It carried over all year. This was a team that lacked rhythm. It lacked juice. It lacked consistency. And I think the offensive struggles, part of that was because McCaffrey was out. Brandon Ayuk was holding out. Trent Williams was holding out. There were injuries on that side of the ball. So if health is on their side, no contract drama, Kyle Shanahan bounces back. I think the head coach helps the quarterback bounce back a little bit. The one thing I worry about is this offensive line. That's something that they just continue to neglect and ignore. And if Brock Purdy weren't so mobile, I think that we would see the offensive line numbers be even worse than they actually are. I know Kyle Shanahan thinks that he can scheme around it. Sometimes he can, but against elite opponents, you can't always do that. That's why they've struggled against good defensive lines in the playoffs. But if the offensive line can at least hold up, and if you don't have injuries all across the offensive side of the football, I do think that the Niners can improve and be better. Christian McCaffrey's health, Trent Williams' health is going to play a big role in that. Ricky Pearsall is going to have to take a leap forward. I think you might need a little bit of something from Jacob Cowing. You got to be better in the red zone. You have to be better on third down. But those are also kind of like fluky numbers that I think happened last year, that if you look at Shanahan's track record, they don't repeat themselves year in and year out. And so I do think with all of the extracurricular baggage stuff that happened last year, I just don't see how that carries over into 2025. Plus the easier schedule, I think is going to help them out a lot too.
I feel like the Niners offense is kind of almost easy to project because Kyle's been here for 8 years. It's a lot of the same players who have been here for 8 years. Like 2019 with Jimmy, 2021, 2022, 2024. It was all kind of the same. I mean, it wasn't great, but they ranked very high in yards gained. What was really different an outlier was the end of 2022 and all of 2023. And I think when Brock Purdy first started playing, we looked at him as like, man, he's so much better than Jimmy, because now when they're in the red zone, they're scoring touchdowns. And when Jimmy was down there, they weren't scoring so many touchdowns. But now I feel like maybe in retrospect, was it Brock or was it Christian? Because when you took Christian out of the equation last year, all of a sudden they had the same red zone issues they had with Jimmy. So if Christian can come back and be 2023 Christian, then the offense will be like that. But I don't expect that anymore. He's 29. He wasn't good last year. And I don't think he was like Dre Greenlaw rushed back from injury last year. He wasn't 100%. Christian did not rush back from injury. He went to freaking Germany first, waited until he really felt it was safe, played, and just wasn't quite that good anymore. So I feel like it's going to be a lot like we saw last year, where they move the ball a lot and they don't have the offensive line to really dictate what they want to do on offense. They have to be complementary, but the defense might take a few months to become dominant, and they turn the ball over more than they should. That's kind of what I expect from this offense. It's going to look good on paper. The EPA per play might be really high, but it's not going to be 2023 again. They're not going to be scoring 30 plus points per game again. I don't think that's going to happen. Again, maybe Christian changes that.
Which is why it's insane they continue to have the offensive line strategy that they have, because if you just had a better offensive line, it helps make up for a lot of your other deficiencies. You already have a great play caller and play designer in Kyle Shanahan. I don't think anybody is going to disagree that he's really smart in that regard. But sometimes he lacks in game management. Sometimes he can lack in the red zone. Sometimes Brock Purdy can struggle in certain areas. If you just have a better offensive line and you can just win at the point of attack, it helps protect Purdy, both with rhythm throws, but also him making plays out of structure. With your running scheme and your running concepts, imagine how much better it could be if you just could protect and block a little bit better. And that's something that the Eagles have grasped, and that's why they're the class of the league right now. And it's something that the Niners just continue to not really hone in on. And I'm not sure if it's because Shanahan has a receiver background, Lynch has the safety background, but it just really boggles my mind, because they could go from being like very good to sometimes dominant if you pair a good offensive line with the scheme, the play calling, and the talent. Anyway.
Let me ask you this real quick. How good would Jalen Hurts be if you changed nothing about the Eagles except you swapped out their offensive line for the Niners offensive line?
Be running for his life. He's one of the top deep ball throwers in the NFL. You take the deep ball away, he's not the same guy. If he doesn't have the same protection, he doesn't have the deep ball. You know what I mean?
So,
and he's a really good runner, but he doesn't have the speed of Lamar. He doesn't have even like some of the short area quickness that Brock Purdy has, and like that Tony Romo patented move where he kind of senses that backside pressure and he just like twirls out. Like Jalen Hurts doesn't have that to his game. So if the offensive line was worse, the run game's impacted, the pass game is impacted, and yeah, he doesn't have as much success as what he's been able to have.